A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
The rabbi has spoken of the hijacking of young people's minds, of how frequently intelligent yeshiva students lose their capacity for critical thought as a result of being bamboozled and brainwashed. Can the rabbi provide us with an example of this phenomenon?
I can relate to you the following experience I recently had. I was driving somewhere and I had a hitchhiker in the car, and I was listening to a recording of a shiur given by a certain Rav on halachic matters. I received a packet of this particular rabbi's shiurim from someone, and I listened to them in the car frequently, not because I necessarily agree with everything that he says, but I definitely learn from some of the things he touches upon, some of the subjects and some of the opinions that I hear that he quotes. And I was listening to one of these shiurim, and he mentioned there that the volume of a kazait, of an olive, for halachic purposes, is 26, I think he said grams, as opposed to what one should expect to hear as 26 cc as a measure of volume, which is what a kazait is. At any rate, he said 26 grams because that's half of an egg, which is, according to what he said there, 52 grams. Which, by the way, is not accurate in terms of today's eggs at least. The average egg nowadays is 60 cc. At any rate, this is what he said, and towards the end of the ride, I said to the hitchhiker, I just want you to know that the fact that I'm listening to these shiurim doesn't mean that I necessarily accept all the opinions that he expresses. And he asked, what, for example, do you not accept, do you not agree with? So I said to him, for example, this statement that a kazait is 26 grams or cc in volume, which is a very large amount if you think in terms of what we all know to be the size and the volume of an average olive. I said this statement is simply unacceptable. It is in fact inane. He asked me why. And he said that's a well-known position amongst the poskim. I said it is true that the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taupe 486 in Or HaHaim states that there are those who claim, that is the language of the Shulchan Aruch, he says there are those who claim that the shiur of a kazait, the volume of a kazait, of an olive, is half of the volume of an egg, of a chicken egg. I said, but first of all, it's not clear that the Shulchan Aruch actually holds that to be the case. He says there are those who say so. And I said, on top of that, you have to know that this view, quoted by the Shulchan Aruch as one opinion, is the view of the Tosafot and other Ashkenazi Rishonim from the medieval period in the north of France, Germany, etc. And perhaps I said to this person, a young man of about 20, obviously a yeshiva student, I said to him, perhaps you do not know, but the fact is the Chachamim of that time in that part of the world, Balei Tosafot, did not know what an olive looked like. This is a very strange and in fact almost incredible piece of information for many people the first time they hear it, but it is in fact true. The Balei Tosafot who lived in Germany, who lived in the north of France, the same would be true for a few who lived in places like Austria, etc. These Chachamim never saw olives for the very simple reason that olives do not grow in that part of the world, and they're not an essential food. One can live quite nicely without olives, and they were not imported. And even olive oil was an extremely rare commodity, which apparently was known only to doctors and chemists, that is to say, people who prepared medicinal substances, creams and the like, where they may have used small amounts of olive oil which were specially imported. Even that was a very rare commodity. Olives themselves were simply unknown. Olives do not grow all over the world. In fact, olives did not grow really in Babylon either. Olives grow in the Mediterranean basin, all over the Mediterranean basin essentially. So Eretz Yisrael, Greece, Italy, parts of North Africa also have olive trees. Spain has huge numbers to this day. Spain is the largest producer of olives and olive oil in the world. So all the Chachamim and all the Jews, simple, everyday Jews who lived in these countries from time immemorial down to the present day, all the people who lived in those parts of the world knew exactly what the size of an olive was, because they saw olives all the time. So I explained to this young man, whereas the Jews and the Chachamim who lived in other parts of the world where olives were unknown, were dealing with an unknown quantity. And he shook his head and indicated that he wasn't at all willing to accept this suggestion. And I said to him, well, the fact of the matter is, we know that olives do not grow in these countries. They didn't in those times, and they do not at the present time either. And we know that olives were unknown from many sources. I said one of the Baalei Tosafot, who initially was of the opinion that an olive was probably, and this was a guess, this was an estimation, the size of half, or the volume of half an egg. He himself writes that when he came to Yerushalayim, one of these individuals, one of these Chachamim, was able to come to Eretz Yisrael. He arrived in Yerushalayim and he saw with his own eyes for the first time, he saw olives. And he said, now I see that there are many, many olives in an egg, many more than I understood before. This proves that he did not see olives previously. And yet this person was still very reluctant to accept what I was saying. I went on to point out to this young man that the Rishonim from places like Spain, who were familiar with olives, wrote something very different. For example, the Rashba, who lived in the 13th century in Spain, and again, Spain is a country which is blessed with olive trees in the millions probably, writes explicitly in Mishmeret HaBayit, part of his work Torat HaBayit, he writes that in the volume of 15 eggs, there are much more than the volume of 60 olives. In other words, in the volume of 15 besim, there are much more than the volume of 60 kazetim. So writes the Rashba, which means, seeing that 15 times 4 equals 60, that means that the volume of a kazayit, of an olive, is much less than a quarter of an egg. How much less, he doesn't say, and it's not his purpose, not his aim in that particular section to determine and to be precise about the volume of a kazayit. In fact, he didn't think it was necessary to write such a thing, which is why the Rashba never did write anything on this subject, because it was obvious to him, as it was to all people in his part of the world, what the volume of an average olive was. He was discussing something else, and for that purpose he wrote that in the volume of 15 eggs there are much more than the volume of 60 olives, and therefore we understand that the volume of a kazayit is much less than a quarter, which in other words, much less than a half of what the Shulchan Aruch quotes in the name of the Tosafot as one view as to the volume of a kazayit. This is with regards to the Rashba. Another Chacham, another Rishon from Spain, in the 13th century into the 14th century, the Ritba, writes in his Hilushim to Masechet Shabbat Daf Ayin Waw, he writes that there are several, this is his language, kama zetim, there are several zetim in the volume of a dried fig. And he also writes explicitly, as Rambam writes explicitly in Hilchot Eruvin, Perek Aleph, Halachat Tet, the first chapter of Hilchot Eruvin, Rambam writes there that with regards to an Eruv, Rambam writes that the required amount of food is the volume of 18 dried figs, which he writes explicitly is equal to the volume of 6 average eggs. Therefore it follows that the volume of an average dried fig is 1/3 of the volume of an average egg, which, by the way, is entirely correct. If you check these two items, take your average egg and take 3 average dried figs, you measure carefully and estimate. If you want, you can test it quite rigorously in a laboratory. Really, that's not necessary. You will find that this is exactly so, that a dried fig is 1/3 of an egg. So if the Ritba writes that knowing that a dried fig is 1/3 of an egg, and writing that a dried fig is several olives worth, several kazethim, then we understand from this that according to the Ritba, and several can't mean less than 3, it probably could mean quite a few more, could be 4, 5 or 6 or even more, but it can't be less than 3. Therefore, we understand from this that at the very least, the volume of a kazayth according to the Ritba is a ninth of an egg, which in fact is a little bit less than the true amount. If we estimate an olive to be 3 cc in volume, which is the average of a certain one of the types of olives which exist here in Eretz Yisrael, which is also the most common type of olive, and there is good reason to believe that this is the olive that was referred to by the Chachamim. Then, and the average egg in Roman times, we know for a fact, was 48 cc. Then we understand from that the volume, that in an egg you have 16 kazethim, 16 times 3 being 48. Even if we assume that the volume of an olive is 4 or 5 cc, we still have many kazethim in an egg, and not a half of an egg. I pointed out all these facts to this young man. I also pointed out to him that we have in Eretz Israel today well over 70 ancient olive trees that still produce fruit, and they all produce the same type of olives that we find throughout the country, again referring to the type known as the Suri olive, and the size of those olives is exactly the same as the olives that we see today, and the age of these trees is between 1,700 and 2,000 years. I also pointed out to him that we have in fact in Israel to this day at least 7 trees in the Galil, which are estimated based on counting the rings which appear in the trunks of the trees, etc., and other indications. The age of these 7 trees is estimated to be at least 3,000 years, and they still produce olives, and those olives are exactly the same as olives today. None of this, surprisingly, or perhaps not so surprisingly, none of this convinced this young man, and he was most unimpressed and in fact somewhat upset with what I was telling him, because he said to me in his own words, what you're saying challenges and in fact destroys the tradition of halakha that we have received. And I tried to point out to him that that's not true. That's only one tradition, one opinion, which was voiced by individuals, by great chachamim, who never saw an olive. Whereas the opinions of other chachamim who did see olives was very different. So to claim this is against the tradition of the Jewish people or the tradition of the great halachic experts throughout the ages is simply not true. And yet he was unwilling to accept anything that I was saying, despite the fact that he had no response to any of these points. At which point I realized that this young man was just one more example, a very sad example of the brainwashing that many yeshiva students undergo as part of their yeshiva training, in which they are taught to switch off the critical faculty of thought in their minds. They are taught not to ask all kinds of questions, not to think rationally, and to accept all kinds of things as being true, even though one can see with one's own eyes that these things are not true. And perpetuating facts or conceptions that are untrue based on historical realities where the Jewish people were unfamiliar with certain types of fruit or other natural phenomena in this world, which resulted in confused and dubious notions as to the size of something or the measure of something. To perpetuate such thinking nowadays, when we all know exactly the size of an olive, is simply irrational, and is unfortunately indicative of the mindset that is all too common in the yeshiva world and in halachic discourse today. And this is something that is in fact tragic, and in fact I view this kind of education, the kind of brainwashing that goes on, the kind of conditioning that these young men are subjected to, I view this as a kind of crime. It is a crime almost a crime against humanity, to take the minds of young, intelligent, very capable young men who could go far in their studies, and to essentially destroy their their potential, to destroy their ability to understand, to learn, and to truly grow and become knowledgeable and great experts in the Torah and seeing things as they are. This is a terrible crime and something to be lamented.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.